Welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast, conversations to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. An uplifting and inspiring series of conversations and talks with your host, Jackie Woodside. We are educating minds, empowering lives, and enlightening souls to create a world where love prevails. In this engaging podcast, we deliver exciting, positive, transformative talks and teachings designed to elevate your life. Now, let's join our host, Jackie Woodside, for this week's session.
Hi there, Jackie Woodside here again, the founder and the host of the Conscious Living Podcast. Do you know what I found out this week? I found out that the Conscious Living Podcast is the #1 podcast on Spotify when you look for conscious living. So I love that, and I hope that you are spreading this along to your friends, because that's what we do here. You know, we talk about what does it mean to be a human being anyway? What are the blessings, the magic, the mystery? And yes, what are the pitfalls, the challenges, and the obstacles of being a human being? That's really what we're going to get into today with someone who I am just so honored and blessed to call not only a colleague, but a dear friend, someone who I feel like I've known my whole life, because her work, really, in some ways, we could call her the grandmother of the personal transformation and development movement, a movement that, no exaggeration, saved my life. Marcia Martin is one of the preeminent founders of the personal development movement. Many of you have probably heard of the EST trainings, which now became Landmark Education, Landmark Worldwide. And Marcia was one of the key people that took a small San Francisco group of people who were kind of getting into nasal gazing and understanding themselves better into a global worldwide movement. And this week, Marcia is launching her behind-the-scenes look at what that was actually like in the early days of the personal development movement. This is going to be an extraordinarily revealing, intimate, and wise conversation about the roots of this movement that you and I both love so dearly, the movement around personal growth and transformation. So, Marcia, thank you for taking time. I know you're super busy right now because you've got this book launch coming up. Marcia's book is called Sex, Power, and Transformation. I can't wait to dive into this. So thank you for taking time out of your busy week when you're launching this book to be here with us on the Conscious Living Podcast. Welcome.
I am so thrilled to be here with you, Jackie. And I just want to say really fast, let's not call me the grandmother. Let's call me.
I know, right?
I think
the what? What's the word?
The godmother.
The godmother.
I was at the beginning, so it is a long time.
Right. That's what I wanted to honor, the origin of it without kind of that, matriarchal, maternal feeling. But yeah, you are the backbone. Not you alone, obviously, but you were one of the, and I'll tell you, Marcia, this is an interesting place for us to dive in. I've told a number of people about you and your work, and how involved you were with Landmark Education, that we now understand what was then called EST. And I've said to all of them, the reason that you don't know Marcia Martin's name as much as you might know Werner Erhard's name is because she was a woman and doing this work in the 70s. And it was, think about when you think about the early people who were in the field. And by the way, you know them all. They were all friends of yours, including, and who are in the book. Jack Canfield is one of the ones that comes to mind, and Werner Erhard, and of course, many, many years later, Tony Robbins, but he was almost second generation compared to you and your colleagues. So you wrote this book, Sex, Power, and Transformation, the woman behind the scenes of what's the subtitle?
The subtitle is let me leave and look. The subtitle is The Untold Story. The Untold Story of EST and the Human Potential Movement from the woman who helped make it happen. Wow. And I was part of a team.
Yes, of course. It wasn't just you, but in reading...
It was a small team. There was just a handful of us.
Yeah.
That's what's extraordinary, is we did start with a 30-person seminar in February of 1971. Our first seminar had 30 people in it. Werner was leading it. It was called Mind Dynamics then. And by October of that same year, we had started EST. And by the time I left EST in 1980, there were already almost 700,000 graduates.
Gosh, from 30 to 700,000 in 9 years.
And now there's over 3.5 million graduates of EST and Landmark. And as you know, the whole human potential movement and self-help, it's right now it's a $48 billion industry. So we created an industry. It was really a cultural
Well,
phenomenon.
and the whole coaching industry got birthed out of Landmark. I'm just going to refer to it as Landmark, but it was birthed out of the movement created by you and Werner and the people who were in that kind of core. The whole coaching movement. Thomas Leonard, that's the other gentleman that I was thinking of. Thomas
Leonard and Jim Selman and Werner Erhard really were the key people that created the coaching industry.
Yeah.
And they did some research. And I remember when we were doing the research on what makes a great coach and why should a person have a coach? Because at that time, the only coaches were in sports.
Yeah,
And
of course.
Werner and Thomas and Jim got the idea that you could have a coach for business and a coach for individuals. And did some real research. And I was there at the beginning of that research also. And pretty soon there was a coaching industry. I mean, it's really a remarkable story.
It is a remarkable story. And it's just such an honor to be here chatting with you about those early years. The industry's been around long enough now that, looking at the historical roots of it, I call myself an old school coach. I was trained by Thomas Leonard. So, kind of,
there you go.
yeah. So, I call myself an old school coach. I've been coaching now for 31 years. And what I've seen happen to the coaching industry over those 30 years is difficult to watch because, as you and I both well know, what coaches now sell as coaching is mostly consulting. They're going to teach you how to scale your business. They're going to teach you how to be a public speaker. That's not coaching. It's consulting. It's important. I'm not saying it's not that. But let's just start there, Marcia. From your early days, from your early research, you and I being old school coaches, what does it really mean to be a coach?
Oh my God, that's such a big question. For me, coaching for me particular, and there are lots of ways that people coach, but I create the space safe enough for a person to really look within and find out what their own fears and concerns are and the obstacles or the limiting beliefs that they have. And then I assist them getting through that or looking at new possibilities of how they could perceive or have a new perspective or consider what's possible so that they can get in touch with their own power to create their own future rather than being at the effect of their circumstances. And so I feel like I'm a partner. I'm almost like a tour guide. You're on the bus and you're going and everybody's looking out the left side of the bus at the mountains, let's say. And I'm the person that says, well, what about on the other side? What do you see over here? And let them look to see what they see, not tell them what to see and not tell them their answer. I don't have an answer for anybody. I have a way of having a person feel safe enough to look at their own fears, to get through those fears, let go of those fears, and find their own answer. And that's what coaching is for me.
That's really beautiful. We could do a whole podcast on this topic.
Good.
Because I have a lot to say about what you just said and questions about it, but I digress. Let's talk about the book.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's so much more I could say there, and we'll have to have that conversation sometime. We'll do another podcast show. Let's talk about the book. Let's start with the title: Sex, Power, and Transformation. That's an eye-catching, powerful, mysterious title. Why the Sex, Power, and Transformation as the title?
Well, in the beginning, I was kind of just horsing around, and I thought sex, drugs, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then I thought I should write a book on sex, drugs, and transformation. But then I realized it really wasn't sex, drugs, and transformation. It was really sex, power, and transformation. And sex is not just sex, sex, sex. It's relationships. It's how people connect. It's what you are in terms of that relationship. Are you controlled? Are you manipulated? Are you inspired? Are you motivated? So there's a lot inside of that. But I thought it best described it. And also was catchy. You know, you got to have a catchy title to a book.
A catchy title for sure. So the book isn't kind of filled with lurid stories of sex scandals from the 1970s. It's more
No, I probably could write that kind of a book.
right. That'll be the sequel. That will be the sequel. It's called Sex and Transformation. I love that. So
I'm really excited about this book, Jackie, because it's a memoir. It's my story. I was a young girl, and before I ever met Werner or was part of creating and building EST and being an important person or a force in the human potential movement, I studied and interned with my aunt, who was a clairvoyant healer. She was an esoteric astrologist. Now, back then, which was around 67, 68, 69, before I had met Werner, I was studying with her, and she taught me meditation, and she taught me the chakras. She taught me how energy works. She taught me about how to distribute energy, how to heal myself and heal others. And so I was in San Francisco, a hippie in the Haight-Ashbury days. And so it was all about love and peace and goodwill. And so, you know, meditating and learning about how to heal seemed like the natural thing to do. And that's how I grew up. That was my base. So when I met Werner and realized that he had this training that could wake people up to their own power and their own success and their own ability to cause things to happen in their future, to really be responsible for their actions and for their destiny, I was so excited because that's what I had been learning from my aunt. And I thought this was a way really for the masses to learn how really wonderful and beautiful and powerful that they were. So I jumped in right away and just started enrolling everybody in the universe, pretty much. I just started the bus driver. I would get on and tell him about the training, the women I met in the lavatory of the restaurants I was at, my friends. It didn't matter. I walked down the street. If I saw somebody that looked like they needed help, I would say, you got to come to this training. And Werner noticed that I was bringing all of these guests. So within a month, I was already working for Werner and enrolling. And so it started that simple. I was a young girl, barely 24. And within that year, I became vice president and head of the communication registration division of EST. And I was responsible for filling trainings. And we started off with 30, and then we had 65 people, and then we had 125 people, and then we had 250 month after month. And pretty soon we had 250 every month in San Francisco, and then we went to Los Angeles, and then we went to Aspen, and then we went to Hawaii, and I was the person that was in charge of promoting and filling those trainings. So I really just learned so much.
Marcia, I just want to interrupt here for a second and add context for our listeners. So you heard what Marcia just said, those numbers. It's absolutely staggering. But the context I want to add is this was in the 1970s. This was before social media. This was before cell phones. This was way before the internet. So how did you and your very small team of people do that to go from 30 to 65 to 250 every couple of months to 250 monthly to new cities, and particularly new cities? I get where you could, maybe locally with a small group of committed people, create this kind of explosive growth. But then how did it jump? It makes me think of the concept of like when thought form jumps. The 100th monkey theory, that's what I'm thinking of. The 100th monkey theory is when you teach enough monkeys to wash their potatoes on one part of the continent of Africa, when they studied them, monkeys on the other side of the continent started doing it when there was a mass consciousness of monkeys washing their potatoes. So that story about EST reminds me of that. Like you jumped from San Francisco to LA to Hawaii. Like, how did you do that?
Well, first of all, the thing about consciousness is it expands, and I can understand about the monkeys. But with working with Werner was brilliant, and he was he still is. I mean, he's alive still, and I love him very much and care for him.
He's in his 90s now. Is that
he's
right?
Almost 90, yeah, I think
Almost
so.
89.
he was just so brilliant at marketing and sales, and he taught us how to communicate, and he taught us how to connect. And there were a few of us, all women, in the book business. Werner started out as an encyclopedia salesman, and we started our training by learning all of those kinds of communication skills, sales skills, leadership skills by going door to door selling encyclopedias. And it was an incredible training because, first of all, you had to learn about commitment, and you had to learn about obstacles. You had to learn about different kinds of things that, your emotions and giving up and all of those things we learned in the field. So what I can tell you is when he did a training, it was brilliant, and he had a way of opening people's eyes and waking them up. So the product was great. That's where it started. When people came to the training, whether there were 30 people there, 50 people there, 150 people, their lives changed. They were transformed. Then what we did was we had procedures, and you can find out all of this in the book. It's much more fun to read the book because you have all the stories, but I can tell you a little bit here. We would ask the graduates to bring guests if they wanted to share this with their friends, and they would bring guests, and then myself and a couple of the other women in the team would lead the guest seminars, and we were trained so well in communication that people would enroll. And so it wasn't accidental that people enrolled. We knew how to share, we knew how to connect, we knew how to close, we knew how to get people through their fears, we knew how to get the check, and then those people would come, and then we would then tell them to bring guests.
Okay.
And then pretty soon that became so sustainable, you see, because then Werner taught others how to do the training. And we, the girls in the field, taught others how to do the selling. And pretty soon, you can have it be exponential from that point. The other thing about a new city, it wasn't like everybody found out about it. I was in charge of communication and registration. So I was in charge of opening new centers or opening new cities. When we had 50 graduates that were from another city, and you can understand that, of course, if we only gave the training in San Francisco, the next logical city for people to come up to do it would be from LA. So pretty soon we had 50 graduates in LA. If we had 50 graduates in LA, then I would organize them to have a special guest seminar where those 50 graduates could bring their guests. And Werner and I would lead a special guest seminar, and he would tell about the training and make people understand what was possible. And I would handle the enrollment, and pretty soon we would fill another training there. And so it organically developed.
Wow. And so powerfully, this is kind of the upside and downside. And again, for our listeners that aren't familiar with this company, the present day, it is called Landmark Worldwide, Landmark Education Corporation. And its predecessor was EST, that was founded by Werner Erhard and Marcia.
Werner founded the training, and myself and a few other people are called founding members. In other words, we were there and we built the organization with Werner.
Okay. And this is kind of what gets Landmark a bad rap, that it's all about the sale and it's all about the pitch. That what you just described on how that organic growth happened, I can relate to it because I've done all of that. I've led guest seminars for Landmark. I've gone to special evenings, a special evening about the Landmark Forum. They still use that same methodology to grow the company.
Well, no, not quite correct, because this is one of the reasons I wrote the book.
Okay.
Things really changed. And of course, things do change and things evolve.
Sure.
And the way I was taught when Werner taught me and when he shared about bringing guests or about leading guest seminars, it was never about the statistics or the number of guests, which I understand that's what it's about now. It was about sharing yourself and your heart and answering people's questions and serving. And then at the end of the seminar, you look to see how many people had enrolled. You didn't think about that before the guest seminar. Now, I taught the guest seminar leaders for many years. I was the one that actually put the guest seminar leaders program, the GSLP, together. Werner gave me that assignment, and I put that together and created it with him and led that guest seminar leaders program for many, many years. But what happened is people got focused on the statistic. When you start getting focused on the result that you want, you become forceful and manipulative. See, if you look at the statistic after the fact, then it can become something that gives you information. You can say, oh, the statistic's down. What did we do that didn't work? Or the statistic's up. What did we do that did work? But when you try to get the statistic, when you're made to bring guests, then it goes into manipulation. And that's why I wrote this book, is I realized that as one of the grandparents, we're back to I do feel I trained a lot of people. And so I have a responsibility. It's like they're my children almost. And I want, just like you would, when you have children and they have children, you want your grandchildren to know their history. And I want the people to know their history. And their history came from, I feel, there are certain things when you do selling. There's light and there's dark. And that's the thing I want to bring out in the book is transformation isn't one thing. It's not all good and it's not all bad. You have to have a choice in the matter yourself. You have to be responsible for your own values and your own wisdom. When you get taken up by the charisma of a leader, and we can see it happening today in today's culture, and just go along because you're supposed to, or because of the agreement of the group, pretty soon that becomes a cult. Pretty soon it becomes you don't have a voice, you don't have a choice. And I don't think that that's a healthy thing. And I want people to know the danger signs of when that starts to happen, when you give up your own power, when you stop looking to see what's right for you. Because transformation itself is wonderful. But if it becomes controlled and you're inside of it like it has to be a particular way and somebody else is giving you their answer, then it can become a detriment. And so I want this book to be something that's empowering and where people can see that the human spirit is bigger than any kind of control and that that's possible for them to have transformation, but without the control and the power dynamics that sometimes go along with it when you have a charismatic leader. And there are many charismatic leaders in the world that are kind of not really concerned really with you. They're more concerned with what they want you to do. And in the beginning of Est, I mean, I have to tell you, Werner was really totally caring about people waking up. And that's why I followed him. And over time, it's become something else for some people, for some parts of the organization. And I wanted to bring some light on that. I wanted to share the whole aspect of the good, the bad, and the ugly of transformation and how people need to be responsible and how powerful the human spirit is. My story is one of many challenges and some betrayals, and I've gone through very big hurts and like any other human being, but I have been taught from the beginning about who I am. And in this book, I think you discover that you can get through anything and that anything is possible. And so that's what I want this book to be, as a gift.
Beautiful. As you were just sharing that, I had the vision of you doing this interview on Oprah, that this is such a seminal book that it would be, somebody needs to get this to Oprah, because I am sure it's something that her company, her mission would be aligned with, because it is such a powerful story. What you just said about like people have to really know that the transformation is inside them. They don't have to listen to just the charismatic leader. You had to make that hard choice. So you were with Est, in a very high level of responsibility for about 9 years, and then you left. Tell us about that moment, that choice, that redirection of your life, and how, I mean, I can only imagine, because having been heavily involved with landmark education, I know it's not just your job. It becomes your whole life, your social circle. Your days are from the time you get up until the time you go to bed. You're doing stuff with enrollment and with the center. And so I really get that your whole life was wrapped up was it est then, or yeah, it was still est back then, right? When you left, yeah. So tell us about that decision point and how you were able to do that.
The answer to that question is the whole entire book, just so you know. So it's a little bit hard to answer that question here. But I can say that's one of the problems. I feel that I got to a place where I realized that all I had was inside of that one way of looking. All I had was inside of that one way of a decision or an answer, and that I was isolated. And it was scary to leave because I knew that if I left, I would be alone, because everything in my life, and that's one of the things that it wasn't like that in the beginning. The whole purpose of the training and human potential was that you could discover who you are as a human being and be more effective and be more contributive and be more powerful, so that you could take that understanding of who you are into your life and make a better difference. And what I notice has become in many of the trainings is people are almost disabled and they can't even speak to their family unless their family has done the training that they're in. And that's not how it was. And that's not how I feel it should be. So that's part of the problem, is that when people get so isolated inside one point of view that they can't even see any other way, that's dangerous.
I'm thinking of how that's mirroring what's happening politically for us. Families are separating over political views. And to me, it's not just politics. What I've said about this is it's a reflection of someone's values and the cultural schism that we are in the face of right now, the polarization. So what you just said reminds me of what we're going through in this kind of cultural devolution, if you will. I do feel like there's a cultural devolution going on, which, really makes me wonder what role the transformational movement has played in getting us to this current moment. It's been a huge industry, and certainly so much good has come of it. But I love what your book is pointing to, is that you really do have to have the capacity to look within, to bring judgment, to bring discernment, and keep a broad lens rather than a very narrow lens of wisdom and possibility in the world.
And what I've noticed too, because since I left EST, I left disconnected really in 1980, although I kept my connection and correspondence and relationship in terms of I've seen Werner over the years and I respect his work, and I'm glad to say that I got so much out of it and I appreciate everything that he gave me. But at the same time, I realized that it's difficult when you're creating an organization, because I went into corporate training. I created my own trainings for many, many years. My whole work has been to make people's lives better and more powerful in my whole life. And in corporations, I consult, I coach, I train corporate executives how to be more powerful, how to lead better, how to be a championship performer, how to communicate more artfully, all of those things. And what happens is that you have a fine line between getting everybody aligned, going in the same direction, because you need that to produce a result. A fine line between nobody having a voice. So somehow you have to find the middle place where you can accept input and you can consider other points of view and you can discuss things and collaborate. But it happens faster if everybody just does what you say. But if everybody just does what you say, then you have a bunch of robots. So it's one of those things. It's a dance to get the right formula.
And back in the day, in the transformational movement, that dance did not exist.
No.
You told some very compelling, I would even say some brutal stories
In the book.
in the book of what you experienced in the early days of the transformational movement. Do you want to touch on, you don't need to tell the story necessarily, you can if you want, but do you want to touch on any of that? Because, that is what you're pointing to, is that people didn't really have the room inside the organization, and those even on the close fringes, to have their own view, their own take on things, their own input. So do you want to address that at all?
Yeah, I think it's hard to address because you've had a chance to read the book, and so you know the whole context. And so you really have to sneak up on it in order to have it be understandable. But you have to understand in the early 70s, what you said about the internet is very interesting. At one point, as being the communication registration division head, I had over 35,000 people registered in trainings.
Oh my God.
And no internet. Okay.
Oh, like
And
how?
no,
I know it happened, right? There were
not even no internet, Jackie, no computers.
no computers.
I had boxes with cards, boxes and boxes in my office on the floor to keep track of who was in which training, and a system that I made up of how to count how many people in this training, who's in the Denver training, who's in the Washington, D.C. training, who needs a message, who needs to get the registration papers filled out. Oh, somebody wants to transfer. Oh, somebody wants to withdraw. Oh, somebody died. All of that has to happen. And it didn't happen on a computer. It happened in the boxes with the cards in the back floor of my office. And you have to understand it was a different world then. And the other thing that it was different is encounter groups were using different kinds of processes that were felt that were able to give breakthroughs to people. And they were very tough. People were screaming at you and getting you to let go of your beliefs. And the encounter groups were a lot harder then. And so some of the ways that we trained our trainers, or I was trained, was very scary. Those kinds of procedures aren't used. But back then, it was felt that that was the way to get a breakthrough, the way to get out of your mind, to get out of your automatic patterns. So
And it did,
that,
and it did. It
yeah,
was, it worked. Yeah, it worked. It's not what gets used for the most part any longer,
yeah.
but it did have its efficacy. I mean, landmark education is still a huge player in this industry. So it didn't go away despite all of those, kind of questionable practices around transformation and breakthroughs. It did work. And
You know what I'm reminded of? A lot of parents years ago teaching their children how to swim would just throw them off the dock.
I remember that. Yeah.
That's how you learn to swim. Your dad said, "You want to learn to swim? Here, throw you in the
Go.
water." And you know what? You learned to swim. You died.
Yeah, right?
It got to be different as time went on. We said, okay, well, I think there's a better way we can teach the babies how to swim. Maybe we should put them in a swimming pool and let them paddle for a little bit. So the same with transformation, the same with, understanding what it means to coach or consult. It's an interesting, this book is really, really interesting. If I didn't write it, I'm telling you, I would read it because I think.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't read anything other than spirituality, philosophy, psychology, neuroscience. I don't read memoirs, and I read your book over the course of like 3 or 4 days. It was absolutely captivating. Thank you for asking me to be an early reader. I was honored by that. I was honored to give a testimonial for the book, and to have you on this podcast to talk about it. So I want to just start wrapping up here by saying a couple of things, and then ask for your final thoughts. A couple of things I want to say is, first of all, I really do want to acknowledge you as being one of the foundational pillars of a movement that has transformed the world. Like, I'm deeply disturbed by what's happening in our world right now, but I do know that evolution is not a linear process. And, what we saw in the years prior to this kind of current division that we're experiencing was a movement toward oneness and peace and prosperity. There was that hope. And now, as the course of evolution, we're back in wars, we're back in all kinds of division. I know the breakthrough societally, globally will come. And I just want to really acknowledge you as being one of the pillars of this world of possibility and magic that is before us. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, is just to acknowledge you for that. And that this book is just the book to really understand where this movement came from, like hands down. So if anybody's committed to that, they have to read this book. Second thing I want to say for our listeners, because we're kind of talking about both sides of the transformational movement. Second thing I want to say is landmark education absolutely saved my life. I had done many years of psychotherapy, probably a few years, many in total, of 12-step programs and, other forms but of transformational work. But it wasn't until I did the work at Landmark Education that I really began my transformation from hot mess to happy and blessed. And I'm just so grateful to you, Marcia, for being one of the people that made that happen in my life. So I want to acknowledge you for that. So anything you want to say to our listeners before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, when I left EST, many of the great transformational teachers and people that wanted to put together programs came to me because they had seen what I had done at EST and wanted me to do it. I'm one of the people that helped John Hanley grow LifeSpring. I helped Bob Hoffman take the Hoffman process international. I ran Tony Robbins' business for 2 years. I co-created the Transformational Leadership Council with Jack Canfield. So I'm kind of like the Forrest Gump of transformation. I've kind of been at the beginning of each of those things. So it's not just Landmark that has this issue in terms of a choice between control or influence. And all of the programs and the many wonderful leaders that are out there transformationally really serve people to wake them up and have their lives grow. But there is this piece that if we're not careful, if we don't watch, that it can turn into a cult or it can turn into a dangerous kind of manipulation. And so I am totally for people taking programs and self-help. I just want people to stay awake and make their own choices and know that, it's a dangerous journey, just like caterpillar to butterfly. When you have transformation, it's messy and it's dangerous and you got to stay awake. So I guess the last thing I would say is for people to look for a place that they can find coaching and consulting and training that allows them to have the kind of experience that you had, that you and I both had. I had through EST, you had through Landmark. Many people have through different kinds of programs, but to be wary and to be awake in terms of don't get swept away and think it's all everything. There's shades of gray. It's not black or white. There's shades of gray, and so be careful. Mm-hmm. And I just really thank you, Jackie, for your support and for your praise of my book, and you know how much I love you. Thank you so much.
I love you too. Thank you so much for being with us today. And, I just really want to, again, affirm to our listeners, this is a book worth reading. So thanks so much, Marcia, and we'll connect again soon.
Okay.